For 43 years, I shaped young minds as a mathematics teacher at Westfield High School. Not teaching the advanced placement courses that sent students to Ivy League universities, but rather the remedial classes where I helped struggling teenagers grasp concepts they'd missed. My classroom became a sanctuary for students who had been labeled slow or difficult, labels I refused to acknowledge. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Everyone learns differently at their own pace, I would tell my colleagues when they questioned my dedication to these challenging classes. These students don't need another person giving up on them. My principal once asked why I never pursued department chair positions or curriculum development roles that would have advanced my career and substantially increased my salary. The answer was simple. My schedule allowed me to be present for my family in ways my own mother never could be for me. I grew up in a household where financial necessities took precedence over presence. My mother worked 2 jobs to support us after my father abandoned our family when I was just 8 years old. She loved me fiercely, but she was often absent, missing school plays, parent conferences, and many milestone moments. I promised myself that my own children would never experience that particular emptiness. James and I met during our first year of teaching, both of us idealistic 23-year-olds determined to make a difference. He taught history with a passion that made past civilizations come alive for his students. Our courtship was simple: coffee in the faculty lounge, chaperoning school dances together, grading papers side by side in comfortable silence. We married, after 2 years, pooling our modest teacher salaries to purchase a small starter home in a neighborhood with good schools. Our children came in quick succession: Michael, then Rebecca 14 months later, and finally Daniel 2 years after. That, our 4-bedroom colonial stretched our finances to their limits, but we were determined to provide stability in a good school district. Vacations were camping trips to state parks rather than flights to tourist destinations. Christmas gifts were thoughtfully selected rather than extravagant. College funds took priority over home renovations. James worked summer school and Saturday enrichment programs while I tutored struggling students in the evenings. Every extra dollar went toward our children's future opportunities or prudent investments. For our retirement, we lived by a simple philosophy: sacrifice now so our children wouldn't have to later. When Michael showed remarkable aptitude for computer science in high school, we found a way to send him to specialized summer camps, even when it meant postponing replacing our aging refrigerator. When Rebecca's artistic talents emerged, we converted part of our basement into a studio space with proper lighting and ventilation. When Daniel's interest in marine biology developed, we arranged family vacations near research facilities where he could attend junior naturalist programs. The children flourished under our attention and support. Michael graduated from Carnegie Mellon with honors. Rebecca earned a scholarship to Rhode Island School of Design, and Daniel completed his doctorate in marine ecology at Scripps Institution of Oceanography. Their achievements became our greatest source of pride. James and I had planned to travel during our retirement years, to finally see the ancient ruins he had taught about for decades, to experience the mathematical wonders I had only shown students in textbooks. We started a special savings account separate from our regular retirement funds, adding to it monthly for 30 years. Then, just 3 months after his retirement, James clutched his chest during our morning walk and collapsed. A massive heart attack took him instantly, leaving me alone at 68 to navigate a future we had always planned to share. Grief consumed me initially. The house felt cavernous without his gentle presence. His books stacked haphazardly on every surface. His half-finished crossword puzzles. For several months, I barely left my bedroom, let alone the house. It was my grandchildren who gradually pulled me back into life. By then, there were 7 of them, ranging from toddlers to teenagers, each carrying echoes of James in their mannerisms or features. Michael's son had his grandfather's analytical mind. Rebecca's daughters inherited his artistic sensibility. Daniel's twins shared his fascination with the natural world. I poured my love for James into these children, becoming the grandmother who never missed a school play, soccer match, or art exhibition. Every birthday was celebrated with homemade cakes decorated to reflect their current passions. Every holiday found my home transformed into a wonderland of decorations and traditions. I maintained meticulous calendars of their activities, often driving hours to attend events when their parents were too busy with work commitments. Our tradition of family Sunday dinners became sacred to me, the one constant in a changing world. I would spend days preparing, making each child's favorite dishes alongside new recipes I thought they might enjoy. These gatherings kept James's memory alive through family stories and shared remembrances. When Michael's technology startup struggled, during its initial phase, he came to me hesitantly, explaining the temporary cash flow issues common to new ventures. Without hesitation, I wrote him a check for $50,000 from James's life insurance money. "Mom, once we secure another round of funding, I'll pay back every penny," he promised, relief evident in his voice. "Family supports family," I replied simply. "Your father would have wanted to see your dream succeed." 6 months later, when Rebecca needed a down payment for her first home after her difficult divorce, I offered $30,000 from the same fund. When Daniel's twins were diagnosed with learning disabilities requiring specialized education services not covered by insurance, I quietly paid the $22,000 annual tuition for 3 years until they could transition to public school programs with appropriate accommodations. None of my children knew about the inheritance I had received from my great-aunt Meredith, a childless mathematician who had recognized my intellectual gifts early and quietly invested in my future. Upon her passing when I was 45, she left me a portfolio of blue-chip stocks and municipal bonds that James and I never touched, allowing it to grow steadily over decades. This became our legacy fund, money we intended to distribute among our children and grandchildren after our passing. After James died, I continued living modestly in our family home, carefully managing my teacher's pension alongside the investment income. My children assumed this reflected limited means, rather than deliberate choice. I never corrected this misconception, preferring to observe how they managed their own resources rather than creating expectations about future windfalls. As my 70th birthday approached, I found myself looking forward to the celebration with unexpected enthusiasm. 7 decades felt significant, a milestone worth acknowledging with those I loved most. My children had always organized wonderful gatherings for my birthdays in the past. For my 65th, they had surprised me with a retirement party that brought together colleagues and students spanning my entire teaching career. So when the week of my 70th birthday arrived without any mention of plans from any of my children, I assumed they were orchestrating another surprise. I kept my calendar deliberately open, waiting for the last-minute invitation or the unexpected arrival of family members at my door. But my birthday came and went without a single phone, call, card, or text message from any of my children or grandchildren. No surprise party materialized. No belated excuses were offered. For the first time in 40 years, my birthday passed as if it were any other day, completely forgotten by the family for whom I had centered my entire life. That evening, I sat, alone at my kitchen table with an untouched slice of cake I'd purchased for myself, scrolling through social media to see what had occupied my family's attention on this day. Michael had posted about a corporate retreat in Aspen. Rebecca had shared photos from her weekend tennis tournament. Daniel had checked in at an exclusive restaurant with his wife, celebrating their anniversary, a date that had apparently taken precedence over his mother's milestone birthday. Something shifted inside me as I closed my laptop, a fundamental recalibration of priorities I had maintained for decades. The mother and grandmother who had sacrificed everything was awakening to the possibility that her generosity had not just been taken for granted, but had become entirely invisible to those who benefited from it most. With sudden clarity, I realized it was time to make a different choice. The forgotten birthday didn't happen in isolation. Looking back, I can now recognize the subtle shift in family dynamics that had been occurring for years, changes I had willfully ignored in my determination to maintain the close-knit family James and I had worked so hard to create. The first noticeable change came 3 years after James passed away, when our tradition of Sunday family dinners began to falter. For decades, these gatherings had been sacrosanct, the one time each week when all 3 children and their families would gather around my dining room table, regardless of busy schedules or competing obligations. "Mom, I'm so sorry, but we can't make it this Sunday," Michael called one Friday afternoon. "There's an investor meeting in New York I need to prepare for. It's critical for the company's next funding round." "Of course I understand," I assured him, swallowing my disappointment. "Your work is important. We'll miss you, but there's always next week." Except there wasn't always next week. That single absence became a precedent. Soon, legitimate work. Obligations gave way to more nebulous excuses: networking events, children's extracurricular activities, home improvement projects that suddenly couldn't wait. Within 6 months, our weekly family dinners had become monthly gatherings, then quarterly events that required weeks of advance planning and multiple reminder calls. I adjusted, telling myself this was natural as my children built their own lives and successes. I began preparing less elaborate meals, no longer spending days cooking every child's favorite dishes. The leftovers that had once been divided among departing family members now filled my freezer for weeks. Then there were the phone calls. Throughout their adult lives, my children had maintained regular communication, weekly calls that kept me connected to their daily challenges and triumphs. Michael would call during his morning commute every Tuesday. Rebecca and I had standing coffee dates by phone each Thursday while she prepared for her art classes. Daniel would check in every Sunday evening, often putting his twins on the line to share their latest discoveries. These rhythms of connection gradually eroded after James died. At first, I didn't notice the increasing intervals between calls, or perhaps I chose not to. When I did reach out, conversations became shorter, often interrupted. "Mom, can I call you back? I'm just heading into a meeting," became a common refrain, though the promised return calls frequently never materialized. I found myself learning about significant events in my children's lives through social media, rather than direct communication. Rebecca's gallery opening, which I would have rearranged my schedule to attend, appeared as a series of photos on Instagram after the fact. Daniel's research was featured in a prestigious journal, news I discovered when a former colleague sent congratulations via email. Michael's promotion to CEO of his growing company was announced on LinkedIn before he thought to share it with me. When I did see my children in person, I noticed how they interacted with their smartphones more than with me. Family gatherings found them constantly checking emails or responding to texts, their attention fractured and divided. "Sorry, Mom. Work never stops these days," they would apologize without looking up from their screens. The physical signs of distance were accompanied by increasingly obvious financial discrepancies. My children, who had grown up with modest means and careful budgeting, were now displaying symbols of wealth that sometimes startled me. Michael purchased a vacation home in Vail that sat empty most of the year. Rebecca drove a luxury electric vehicle that cost more than James and I had paid for our first house. Daniel and his wife renovated their kitchen with imported Italian marble and custom cabinetry, a project they casually mentioned had cost just north of $100,000. None of this bothered me inherently. I had worked my entire life to give my children opportunities for success. What troubled me was how these material acquisitions seemed to coincide with their decreasing availability for family connections. The more they acquired, the less time they seemed to have. There were smaller betrayals too, moments when I realized my role in their lives had fundamentally changed without my consent. When Rebecca's daughter Emma needed help with advanced mathematics, Rebecca hired a private tutor rather than asking me, her mother who had taught mathematics for over 4 decades. "We didn't want to burden you, Mom," Rebecca explained when I inquired. "Besides, Heather uses all the latest teaching techniques." The implication that my methods were outdated stung more than I cared to admit. I had continued professional development courses throughout my career, always incorporating new, research-based approaches. But suddenly, I was seen as a relic, unsuited for teaching my own granddaughter. Then there was the holiday planning that increasingly excluded me from decision-making. Thanksgiving had always been hosted at my home. The table expanded with extra leaves, chairs borrowed from neighbors to accommodate our growing family. The year I turned 69, Michael's wife Jennifer called with what sounded like a rehearsed speech. "Eleanor, we've been thinking that hosting Thanksgiving is becoming too much work for you," she began, her voice carrying that careful tone people use when expecting resistance. "We'd like to start a new tradition of rotating the hosting duties among our homes. Michael and I would love to host this year." "I don't mind the work," I replied honestly. "I enjoy having everyone here in the home where your father and I raised the family." "We know, but this would be easier on you," Jennifer insisted, "and our new dining room can easily seat everyone." The subtext was clear. Their newly renovated home with its designer furnishings was more suitable for entertaining than my well-worn, comfortable space with its decades of family memories. When I reluctantly agreed, I discovered that hosting duties actually meant excluding me from the rotation entirely. The following year, Rebecca hosted, then Daniel, then back to Michael. My role shifted from hostess to guest, expected to arrive and depart at designated times rather than being the heart of the gathering. The menu changed too, traditional family recipes replaced by catered specialties or trendy dishes featured in gourmet magazines. When I brought my signature cranberry relish one year, I later found it barely touched, pushed aside for an artisanal cranberry ginger compote Jennifer had commissioned from a local chef. Even my gift-giving became problematic. I had always prided myself on thoughtful presents that reflected intimate knowledge of each family member's interests and needs. Increasingly, my carefully selected gifts were met with polite but unenthusiastic responses. "Oh, books! How nice," Michael's teenagers would comment, quickly setting aside my carefully chosen volumes for the electronic devices their parents had provided. One Christmas, after watching my grandchildren's lukewarm reactions to the handcrafted gifts I'd spent months preparing, Daniel took me aside with well-intentioned advice. "Mom, next year you might want to just give gift cards. The kids have pretty specific tastes these days." The suggestion that I didn't know my own grandchildren well enough to select appropriate gifts was perhaps the clearest indication of how peripheral I had become to their lives. Financial discussions provided another telling sign of my changing status. Despite having helped each of my children through significant financial challenges, the loans I had provided were never mentioned again after the immediate gratitude faded. No repayments were offered, no acknowledgement of the outstanding debts appeared in our conversations. Meanwhile, they began excluding me from family financial discussions under the guise of protection. "Don't worry about the cost, Mom. We've got it covered," became their standard response whenever I inquired about shared expenses for family vacations or celebrations. While seemingly considerate, this approach effectively silenced me from participating in family decision-making. My input was no longer valued or sought, as if financial contribution was the only meaningful form of participation. The most revealing incident occurred 6 months before my 70th birthday, when all 3 children arranged a conference call, something that had never happened before. Their unusual coordination immediately signaled that this was no ordinary conversation. "Mom, we've been talking," Michael began, clearly the designated spokesperson. "We're concerned about you living alone in that big house. It's a lot to maintain, and we worry about you managing those stairs as you get older." "I'm managing perfectly." "Well," I replied, surprised by this sudden concern, "I'm still active and healthy. Of course you are, Rebecca jumped in. But wouldn't it be nice to simplify? We've been looking at some wonderful senior communities where you'd have activities and companions your own age. The phrase your own age landed like a slap. When had my age become something that separated me from my family, rather than representing wisdom and experience to be valued? We found a lovely place just 30 minutes from Daniel, Michael continued. It has independent living apartments, but also assisted living options if needed later. We could sell the house and use the proceeds to secure your spot there. The presumption that they should decide when I would leave my home, the home where every corner held memories of James and our life together, felt breathtakingly intrusive. More disturbing was the unspoken financial calculation about using the proceeds of my home sale, as if my assets were already being mentally allocated. I appreciate your concern, I said carefully, but I'm not ready to leave my home. When that time comes, I'll let you know. The silence that followed conveyed their disappointment more clearly than words. They had clearly discussed this plan extensively without me, perhaps even made preliminary arrangements, expecting my grateful compliance rather than resistance. After that call, I began paying closer attention to comments about my house, noticing how conversations often drifted to its maintenance challenges or how much certain neighborhoods had appreciated in value. Each observation felt less like concern for my welfare and more like calculations about a future inheritance. All these incidents formed a pattern I had been reluctant to acknowledge. My children now saw me primarily as an elderly parent to be managed rather than a person with agency, wisdom, and value beyond my role as mother and grandmother. The family I had sacrificed everything to nurture had gradually relegated me to its periphery. So when my 70th birthday passed without acknowledgement, it wasn't truly an isolated oversight, but rather the culmination of a process long underway. The final confirmation that I had become invisible to the people I loved most. That realization, painful as it was, also carried an unexpected gift: the freedom to reconsider how I wanted to spend the remainder of my life, and for whom. The morning. After my forgotten 70th birthday, I awoke with a clarity I hadn't experienced since James died. The sun streamed through my bedroom curtains, the same floral pattern we had selected together 30 years earlier, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. For the first time in years, I had no obligations, no grandchildren to drive to, activities, no family dinner to prepare, no performance to attend. The emptiness felt both terrifying and strangely liberating. I made my coffee stronger than usual and carried it to James's study, a room I had preserved almost exactly as he had left it. His leather chair creaked familiarly as I settled into, something I rarely allowed myself to do, as if occupying his space might somehow erase his memory. Today, however, it felt right. The mahogany desk drawer still stuck slightly on the right side, requiring a firm tug before revealing its contents. Inside, I found the leather portfolio where James had meticulously organized our financial documents. Though I had maintained our accounts since his passing, I hadn't reviewed our complete financial picture in years, instead focusing on managing my day-to-day expenses from my pension. Over the next 3 hours, I spread papers across his desk, logged into accounts, and made phone calls to financial institutions, piecing together a comprehensive understanding of my financial position. The results were illuminating. Between James's life insurance, my teacher's pension, Social Security benefits, and the carefully invested inheritance from Aunt Meredith, I had accumulated significant wealth, far more than my children suspected. Our modest lifestyle and careful investing had allowed compound interest to work its magic over decades. Additionally, our mortgage-free home had tripled in value since purchase, now worth nearly $750,000 in our desirable school district. Most surprising was the special travel fund James and I had started in our 30s, our someday account, we had called it. Intended to finance the world explorations we had planned for retirement, it had continued growing untouched since his death. as I couldn't bear the thought of traveling without him. That account alone contained enough to fund several years of comfortable international travel. As I organized the documents, I created 3 distinct piles: assets my children knew about, assets they didn't know about, and outstanding loans I had provided them. This last stack was substantial, nearly $150,000 in total that had never been repaid despite their initial promises. None of my children had even mentioned these loans in years, much less offered partial repayments, despite their evident financial success. My phone rang twice during this process. Rebecca calling first, then Michael 30 minutes later. I let both calls go to voicemail, not ready to engage with them until I had completed my assessment. When I finally listened to their messages, both expressed variations of the same sentiment. "Mom, just checking in. Haven't heard from you in a while. Call me back when you get a chance." The casual tone, devoid of any acknowledgement of yesterday's milestone birthday, confirmed what I already knew. My birthday hadn't slipped their minds temporarily. It had never registered at all. Around noon, I made myself a simple lunch and carried it outside to the garden James and I had cultivated together for decades. The Japanese maple we had planted on our 20th anniversary now provided dappled shade over the stone bench where we used to sit on summer evenings. I watched bees moving methodically among the lavender blooms, their purposeful activity contrasting with my unusual stillness. "What would you do, James?" I asked aloud, a habit I had developed in the years since his passing. The question hung in the warm air unanswered, but I felt his presence more strongly than I had in years. James had always been my moral compass, the voice of reason balancing my more emotional responses. Yet he had also been fiercely protective of me, unwilling to tolerate disrespect from anyone, even our children during their rebellious teenage years. I knew with certainty he would have been deeply hurt by our children's neglect of my birthday. As I sat contemplating this, my phone buzzed with a text from Daniel. "Hey Mom, do you think you could watch the twins Thursday? Jennifer's mom canceled on us and we have the fundraiser gala." The request, devoid of pleasantries or inquiries about my well-being, much less any birthday wishes, crystallized everything. I was being treated as a convenience rather than a person with my own life and feelings. The message assumed my automatic availability, as if at 70 years old, I couldn't possibly have my own plans or priorities. For the first time in my life, I didn't immediately respond with an offer to help. Instead, I set the phone aside and returned to the house, my decision forming with each step across the garden path. Back in James's study, I opened my laptop and typed "solo travel for seniors" into the search bar. The results were revelatory. Hundreds of companies specializing in guided tours, cruises, educational travel, and adventure experiences specifically designed for older travelers. Forums filled with stories from widowed and single seniors who had discovered new passions and formed meaningful connections while exploring the world. Photo galleries showing people my age and older swimming in the Mediterranean, hiking in New Zealand, taking cooking classes in Thailand. An advertisement caught my eye. Undiscovered Italy, small group journey through Tuscany and Umbria. The 18-day tour featured accommodations in historic villas, cooking classes with local chefs, visits to family-owned wineries, and painting workshops in medieval hill towns. Limited to 12 participants, it promised authentic cultural immersion rather than rushed tourism. Italy had been at the top of James's and my travel list. He had taught about the Renaissance for decades, showing students slides of artwork and architecture he had never seen in person. We had planned to begin our retirement travels there, imagining ourselves sipping wine in piazzas and wandering through galleries housing the masterpieces he had described to generations of students. The tour's departure date was just 3 weeks away, seemingly impossible timing, yet somehow perfect. The cost was substantial, nearly $9,000 excluding airfare, but well within my means given the travel fund's healthy balance. My cursor hovered over the Book Now button as doubt momentarily surfaced. Wasn't this impulsive? Shouldn't I discuss major decisions with my children? What about family obligations? Then I recalled sitting alone at my kitchen table the previous evening, the single candle on my store-bought cake flickering as I scrolled through social media posts of my children's activities, none of which included even a mention of their mother's 70th birthday. I clicked the button and completed the booking process with a sense of exhilaration I hadn't experienced in years. The confirmation email arrived moments later, followed by a detailed itinerary and preparation suggestions. Suddenly, I had a purpose, a deadline, and most importantly, something that belonged solely to me. Over the next hour, I booked a direct flight to Rome, applied for an expedited passport renewal, and researched appropriate clothing for Italian spring weather. Each decision felt like reclaiming a piece of my identity beyond motherhood and widowhood. As evening approached, I found myself drawn to our family photo albums, carefully preserved in chronological order on bookshelves in the living room. I selected volumes randomly, witnessing the visual history of our family through decades, the children's graduations, their weddings, the births of grandchildren, holiday gatherings around this very house. In nearly every photograph, I was slightly off-center or partially visible at the edges, the documenter rather than the documented, ensuring everyone else was properly featured. Even in images others had taken, I was often caught mid-action, serving food, adjusting someone's clothing, reaching to help. Always in service to others, rarely the focus. The most recent albums showed a subtle shift in family dynamics. Fewer gatherings at my home, more events at my children's houses where I appeared. Increasingly peripheral. In several holiday photos from the past few years, I sat slightly apart from the main group, my grandchildren clustered around their parents rather than their grandmother. This visual evidence confirmed what my heart already knew. I had allowed myself to become increasingly marginal in my own family's life. My children had not suddenly forgotten my existence. Rather, I had gradually permitted them to reprioritize me until I became an afterthought. The realization didn't diminish my hurt, but it did clarify my path forward. This wasn't about punishment or retribution. It was about recalibration, establishing a new relationship with my family that honored my inherent worth beyond my utility as grandmother and mother. With this understanding, I returned to James's study and drafted 3 identical emails, one to each of my children. The message was simple and direct. Dear Michael, Rebecca, Daniel, I wanted to let you know that I'll be unavailable for the next several weeks as I'll be traveling in Italy. This is a trip your father and I always planned to take together, and at 70, I've decided it's time to fulfill some of our shared dreams. I've arranged for the house to be looked after in my absence and have suspended my regular volunteering commitments. My flight leaves on the 15th, and I expect to return sometime in June, though my plans remain flexible. I hope you and your family are well. Love. Mom. I scheduled the emails to be sent simultaneously the following morning, knowing this approach eliminated the possibility of them coordinating a response or intervention before I could finalize my plans. The deliberate vagueness about my return date was intentional. For once, my schedule would not revolve around their convenience. After sending the emails, I made one more significant decision. I contacted Stanley Hargrove, the family attorney, who had handled James's estate and had been a trusted advisor for decades. "Eleanor, what a pleasant surprise," Stanley greeted me warmly. "It's been too long since we've caught up. How are you?" "I'm well, Stanley, thank you. I need to make some changes to my estate planning documents, and I'm hoping you might have time to meet with me tomorrow." If Stanley was surprised by the urgency of my request, his professional demeanor didn't reveal it. "I can rearrange some things and see you at 2 p.m. tomorrow. May I ask the nature of the changes you're considering?" I'd prefer to discuss it in person, I replied. But essentially, I'm reconsidering how my assets will be distributed, and I need to ensure everything is properly documented before I leave for an extended trip abroad. I see, he said, his tone indicating he understood the significance. I'll review your current documents before our meeting so we can work efficiently. After ending the call, I felt a curious mixture of liberation and apprehension. For decades, my estate planning had been straightforward, everything divided equally among my 3 children, with specific items designated for particular grandchildren, based on their interests or connections to those possessions. The changes I now contemplated represented a fundamental shift in how I viewed my responsibility to my family and to myself. As night fell, I prepared for bed with an unusual sense of anticipation. For the first time in years, tomorrow held promise rather than routine. I would visit the bank, meet with Stanley, and begin shopping for practical travel items. Simple tasks, perhaps, but each one represented a step toward a future I was choosing, for myself rather than one dictated by others' expectations. Before turning out the light, I noticed the small silver-framed photograph on my nightstand, James and me on our 30th anniversary, both of us laughing as we cut our cake. His eyes crinkled with familiar joy, his hand steady over mine on the cake knife. I think you'd approve of this adventure, I told his image softly. It's time I remembered how to live, not just exist for everyone else. As I drifted towards sleep, I realized I hadn't checked my phone since Daniel's text about babysitting. 3 missed calls and several messages waited, my children finally noticing my uncharacteristic silence. Their belated attention changed. Nothing. The invisible threshold had been crossed, the decision made. Tomorrow would begin the rest of my life, however long or short that might be, lived primarily for myself rather than exclusively for others. The thought brought neither guilt nor anxiety, only a peaceful certainty that I was, at last, honoring the woman James had loved, a woman who deserved to be more than an afterthought in her family's narrative. My meeting with Stanley Hargrove, our family attorney for over 30 years, was scheduled for 2 p.m., but I arrived at his downtown office, building 45 minutes early. Rather than waiting in his reception area, I found a small cafe across the street and ordered a cappuccino, something I rarely indulged in but seemed fitting for my new Italian adventure. As I sipped the frothy coffee, I scrolled through the responses to the emails I had sent my children that morning. Their reactions were remarkably similar and entirely predictable. Michael had called 3 times before resorting to email. "Mom, what do you mean you're going to Italy? We need to discuss this. This seems very sudden and unlike you. Please call me ASAP." Rebecca's response was more emotionally manipulative. "Mom, are you okay? I'm worried about this impulsive decision. Emma has her spring concert in 2 weeks and would be devastated if you missed it. Can we please talk before you make any final arrangements?" Daniel's approach was most practical. "Mom, have you checked with your doctor about traveling so far? At your age? I'm not sure your insurance covers international medical emergencies. Let's look at some options that might be safer and closer to home." None of them acknowledged the significance of my turning 70. None asked if this trip was, perhaps, a birthday gift to myself. Their collective focus remained on the disruption to their expectations, rather than genuine concern for my well-being or happiness. I closed my email without responding and finished my coffee, watching raindrops begin to pattern the windows. Across the street, Stanley's brick office building housed the legal practice his grandfather had founded nearly a century ago. I had first entered those doors with James 40 years earlier to draft our wills after Rebecca was born. The firm had guided us through every major life transition since: home purchases, establishing college funds, creating powers of attorney, and ultimately, managing James's estate after his sudden death. At precisely 1:55 p.m., I crossed the street. under my umbrella and entered the familiar lobby with its dark wood paneling and discreet brass directory. The elevator carried me to the fourth floor where Stanley's assistant, Miranda, greeted me with genuine warmth. "Mrs. Jenkins, lovely to see you. Mr. Hargrove is expecting you. May I bring you some tea while you meet?" "Thank you, Miranda." "Earl, gray would be perfect on this rainy afternoon." Stanley rose from behind his substantial desk as I entered his office, coming around to greet me with a gentle handshake. At 78, he remained sharp and attuned to nuance, his silver hair and bow tie lending him an air of distinguished trustworthiness. "Eleanor, you're looking well," he said, guiding me to a comfortable leather chair across from his desk. "Retirement clearly agrees with you." "Thank you, Stanley. Though I sometimes think the constant activity of keeping up with grandchildren barely qualifies as retirement." He smiled knowingly. "Ah, yes, the myth of leisurely golden years. My own grandchildren ensure I'm busier now than when I was handling full caseloads." He settled back into his chair and opened a folder. "I've reviewed your current estate documents. Everything is in good order, but you mentioned wanting changes. What did you have in mind?" I took a deep breath, organizing my thoughts before speaking. "Stanley, as you know, James and I always planned our estate to benefit our children equally. When he died, I maintained that plan without significant changes. However, recent circumstances have led me to reconsider how my assets might best be distributed." Stanley's expression remained neutral, his years of legal practice having taught him to listen without judgment. "Go on," he encouraged. "My children have achieved significant financial success that James and I helped facilitate through education, support, and direct loans when needed. While I'm proud of their accomplishments, I've become increasingly concerned about their values, particularly regarding family obligations and respect for their heritage." I detailed the forgotten birthday, contextualizing it within the pattern of neglect and taken for granted behavior that had developed. Stanley listened attentively, occasionally making notes but never interrupting. "So you see," I concluded, "I'm not acting from a place of hurt or retribution, though I acknowledge those feelings exist. Rather, I'm recognizing that my children may not need my financial legacy as much as they need a lesson in values." Stanley nodded thoughtfully. "What exactly did you have in mind for the revised estate plan?" "I'd like to establish a three-part approach," I explained, revealing the plan I had developed through the sleepless hours of the previous night. "First, I want to allocate a significant portion of my estate, perhaps 40%, to a foundation supporting mathematics education for underserved students. Teaching was my life's work, and this would honor that commitment while supporting young people who truly need assistance." Stanley made notes as I continued. "Second, I want to establish individual trust funds for each of my grandchildren that would become available when they turn 30, with specific conditions attached. The funds could only be accessed for education, first home purchases, medical needs, or starting businesses, not for luxury items or lifestyle enhancement." "And the remaining portion?" Stanley prompted. "The remaining 20% would be divided equally among my children, but with a condition. Each must first repay the loans they received from me with appropriate interest calculated from the date of issuance. If they choose not to repay those loans, their share would be redirected to the educational foundation." Stanley set down his pen and considered me carefully. "This represents a significant departure from your previous estate plan. May I ask what you hope to accomplish?" "I want my legacy to reflect my values, Stanley. Throughout my life, I prioritized education, prudent financial management, and family responsibility. This revised plan better aligns with those principles, while acknowledging that my children have already received substantial support during the years when they most needed it." "And your home?" he inquired. "Previously, it was to be sold with proceeds divided equally. I'd like to retain flexibility regarding the house. For now, let's indicate it would be sold, and the proceeds added to the educational foundation unless I specify otherwise in the future." Stanley completed his notes and looked up at me. These changes are well within your legal rights, Eleanor. The estate is yours to distribute as you see fit. I can have the revised documents prepared within a week. However, he paused, choosing his words carefully. Have you considered discussing these changes with your children before finalizing them? I appreciated his concern, but shook my head firmly. I believe such a discussion would devolve into emotional manipulation or attempts to change my mind. I prefer to make these decisions independently, as the assets in question are the result of James's and my lifetime of work and careful planning. I understand, Stanley nodded. There's one more matter we should address. Your powers of attorney for healthcare and finances. Currently, Michael holds primary responsibility, with Rebecca and Daniel as alternates. Would you like to reconsider these appointments as well? This question gave me pause. Despite my disappointment in my children's recent behavior, I had no reason to doubt they would make appropriate medical decisions if I became incapacitated. However, the financial power of attorney was another matter entirely. Let's leave the healthcare proxy arrangements as they are, I decided. But for financial matters, I'd like to appoint you as my primary agent if you're willing. My children can remain as alternates in the established order. Stanley appeared slightly surprised, but nodded. I'd be honored to serve in that capacity. Eleanor, I'll include those changes in the revised documents. As our meeting concluded, Stanley escorted me to the door with a final question. When do you leave for Italy? In 12 days, I replied. I'd like to sign the new documents before I depart. I'll have everything ready next week, he promised. And Eleanor? For what it's worth, I think James would approve of your decision to take this journey. He always spoke so highly of your shared travel dreams. His kind words brought unexpected tears to my eyes. Thank you, Stanley. That means a great deal coming from someone who knew him so well. Outside, the rain had stopped, and weak sunshine broke through the clouds as I walked to my next destination, First National Bank, where James and I had maintained accounts for over 4 decades. My purpose was twofold: to inform them of my international travel plans and to access the safe deposit box containing my most valuable jewelry and important documents. The bank manager, Mrs. Collins, greeted me personally, a courtesy I suspected was extended to long-term customers of a certain age rather than standard protocol. Mrs. Jenkins, what a pleasure. How may we assist you today? After addressing the travel notifications, she escorted me to the vault area where the safe deposit boxes were housed. My hands trembled slightly as I inserted my key alongside hers to open the metal box I hadn't visited since adding James's watch and wedding ring after his death. Inside, nestled in velvet pouches and small boxes, lay the physical treasures of our life together. My engagement ring with its modest diamond that James had saved for months to purchase. The pearl necklace he had given me on our 20th anniversary. The antique brooch that had belonged to his grandmother. And most precious of all, a simple gold locket containing photos of our children as young teenagers, before life's complexities had intervened in our relationships. Beneath these personal items lay the more practical contents: our marriage certificate, birth certificates, the deed to our home, and the original documentation for Aunt Meredith's inheritance, which specified her wish that the funds be used to enrich your life with experiences and knowledge that nurture your exceptional mind. Had always interpreted her instructions as guidance to use the money for our children's education and enrichment. Now, with the perspective of age and recent events, I wondered if my great-aunt had intended something different, perhaps for me to pursue my own intellectual and experiential growth rather than solely facilitating others. After carefully examining each item, I returned most to the box, but selected 3 pieces to take with me. The locket, which I would wear close to my heart during my travels. The brooch, which would complement the new travel wardrobe I planned to purchase. And the inheritance document, which I would show Stanley as confirmation of my great-aunt's intentions. As Mrs. Collins escorted me back to the bank lobby, she mentioned casually, "Your son Michael was in last week inquiring about joint accounts. I informed him that we couldn't discuss your banking details without your explicit authorization." I stopped mid-step, turning to face her. "Michael asked about my accounts? Did he explain why?" Her professional demeanor faltered slightly, revealing discomfort. "He mentioned concerns about estate planning and helping you manage your finances as you age. We explained our policies regarding privacy and suggested he speak directly with you about establishing any joint access. This unexpected information sent a chill through me. Michael had never expressed concerns about my financial management abilities, nor had he mentioned wanting to establish joint accounts. That he would approach my bank directly, rather than discussing it with me first, felt like a violation, one that aligned disturbingly with the conversation about selling my home and moving me to a senior community. "Thank you for maintaining my privacy," I said carefully. "I appreciate the bank's professionalism. To be absolutely clear, I have not authorized anyone to access my accounts, nor do I intend to at this time." Mrs. Collins nodded, clearly relieved. "Of course, Mrs. Jenkins. Your financial privacy is our priority. Would you like me to make a note in your file regarding this matter?" "Yes, please do. And if any of my children make similar inquiries in the future, I'd appreciate being notified immediately." This discovery reinforced my decision to revise my estate plans and financial powers of attorney. What I had interpreted as merely forgetting my birthday now appeared potentially part of a larger pattern. My children beginning to position themselves to manage my affairs, perhaps with the best intentions but without my input or consent. As I drove home, my phone rang repeatedly. All 3 children calling in succession, then starting the rotation again when I didn't answer. Text messages accumulated, their tone evolving from questioning to concerned to mildly accusatory as the day progressed. "Mom, we need to talk about this Italy trip. Please call me." "Mom, are you avoiding us? This isn't like you." "Mom, if you don't call back soon, we're going to have to come over to make sure you're okay." This last message from Rebecca prompted me to finally respond with a brief text. "I'm fine. Busy with appointments today. We'll call tomorrow." That evening, I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of tea and a notepad, creating a detailed inventory of my home's contents. Each room, each drawer, each cherished object noted with its history and significance. Some items I designated for specific grandchildren based on shared interests or expressed appreciation. Others I marked for donation to local museums or historical societies that would value their cultural significance. The most personal items, James's books, my teaching materials, our shared journals and letters, I allocated to a special category, to be determined based on demonstrated interest and respect for family heritage. As I worked through this emotional inventory, I realized I was creating more than a simple distribution plan. I was crafting a message to my family about what truly matters, the stories behind possessions, the values they represent, the connections they embody. This awareness sparked a new idea, one that felt both appropriate and profound. In addition to the formal legal documents Stanley would prepare, I would write individual letters to each family member, not explanations or apologies, but reflections on our shared history and my hopes for their futures. These personal communications would accompany the more formal notification of my estate changes. With this decision made, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. My response to my children's neglect would not be petty retaliation, but thoughtful recalibration, an opportunity to clarify what matters most before it's too late. The single exception would be a special envelope I would leave behind when I departed for Italy, one containing information they would need during my absence, but also a message I hoped might prompt reflection about our evolving relationship. Unlike the individual letters to be delivered with my estate documents, this envelope would be waiting for them when they inevitably came checking on me after my continued silence. As I prepared for bed that night, I set my alarm for early morning. Tomorrow would bring a flurry of practical preparations: passport photos, travel clothing, guidebooks, and language refreshers. But it would also bring the most challenging task: drafting the contents of that single envelope, the one that would either begin healing our family fractures or permanently alter our relationships. Either outcome, I realized with surprising serenity, would be preferable to continuing the pretense that everything was fine when clearly it was not. At 70 years old, I had finally learned that authentic connections, even difficult ones, were more valuable than comfortable illusions. As promised in my text, I called my children the following morning. I decided to speak with all three simultaneously, setting up a conference call rather than repeating the same conversation multiple times. This approach would also prevent them from comparing notes and formulating a unified strategy before I had spoken with each of them. At precisely 10 a.m., I dialed into the conference line I had established and waited as my children joined one by one, their confusion about this unusual format evident in their tentative greetings. "Mom? What's going on with this conference call setup?" Michael asked, his businesslike tone suggesting he had stepped away from a meeting to take my call. "I thought this would be most efficient," I replied calmly. "I understand you all have questions about my travel plans, and this way I can address everyone at once." "We're worried about you, Mom," Rebecca interjected before I could continue. "This Italy trip seems so sudden and out of character. Are you feeling all right?" The concern in her voice seemed genuine, though I noticed it centered on the perceived abnormality of my decision rather than my actual well-being. The underlying assumption, that independent action on my part must indicate something wrong, was precisely the mindset I was now challenging. "I'm feeling perfectly well," I assured them. "Better than I have in quite some time, actually. The decision may seem sudden to you, but I've been considering this trip for months." "But why now?" Daniel pressed. "And why alone? If you wanted to travel, any of us would have been happy to arrange something suitable. I could have taken time off next month for a long weekend somewhere closer." His suggestion that I needed his assistance to arrange something suitable, and his characterization of my 3-week cultural immersion as comparable to a long weekend somewhere closer, perfectly illustrated the patronizing attitude that had been building in recent years. "This isn't a spontaneous whim," I explained patiently. "Italy was the first destination your father and I planned to visit during our retirement. The specific tour I've booked focuses on Renaissance art and architecture, subjects your father taught for decades but never got to experience firsthand." "Mom," Michael's authoritative voice cut in, "we understand this might be important to you, but there are practical considerations. Have you thought about travel insurance, language barriers, potential medical issues? International travel is complicated at any age, but particularly for someone as elderly as me?" I finished when he hesitated. "I'm 70. Michael, not incapacitated. I've purchased comprehensive travel insurance, downloaded language apps, obtained the necessary medications and documentation from my doctor, and arranged for proper cellular service abroad. The tour company specializes in travelers in my age range and provides support throughout." The silence that followed suggested they were surprised by my thoroughness. I had anticipated their objections and addressed them before they could be wielded as reasons to cancel my plans. "We're just surprised," Rebecca said finally. "You've never expressed interest in traveling alone before. It seems so unlike you. Perhaps you don't know me as well as you think," I replied, keeping my voice gentle despite the truth in my words. "People evolve, even at 70. After your father died, I devoted myself entirely to supporting all of you and your children. That was my choice, and I don't regret it. But now I'm choosing something different for this next chapter." "Is this about your birthday?" Daniel asked suddenly, his tone suggesting he had just made a connection. "Did we forget your birthday last week? Is that what this is about?" The question hung heavily in the air. The fact that they had to ask, that they truly didn't remember, was more revealing than any response I could offer. Yes, I turned 70 last Wednesday, I confirmed simply, offering no further comment about their oversight. Another uncomfortable silence followed, broken finally by Rebecca's gasp. "Oh my God, Mom, I'm so sorry. With Emma's tournament and the gallery exhibition, it completely slipped my mind. We should have planned something special." "The timing of this trip isn't about punishing you for forgetting my birthday," I said, though in truth, that event had been the catalyst. "It's about recognizing that I've spent decades putting everyone else's priorities ahead of my own. I'm not angry about the oversight, but it did help me realize it's time to make some changes." "What kind of changes?" Michael asked, his voice carrying that cautious tone he used when negotiating difficult business situations. "For now, just this trip. 3 weeks in Italy, experiencing things your father and I dreamed about together. When I return, we can discuss other adjustments that might be appropriate for this stage of my life." "Mom," Michael began, his voice softening to the persuasive tone he typically reserved for difficult clients. "Why don't you postpone the trip for a month or two? That would give us time to properly celebrate your birthday and perhaps adjust some of the travel arrangements to make things easier for you." What he meant, I understood clearly, was time to dissuade me from going at all, or to modify my plans to include a family member as chaperone. The suggestion that I needed their permission or approval to make my own plans rankled deeply. "The arrangements are finalized," I stated firmly. "Non-refundable deposits have been paid and the tour begins in 11 days. I've made my decision." "This doesn't sound like you at all," Rebecca persisted. "You've always consulted us about major decisions, especially since Dad died." "I've consulted you when decisions affected all of us collectively," I corrected. "This is a personal choice that impacts only me, so consultation wasn't necessary." "It impacts us if something happens to you overseas," Daniel countered. "What if you fall ill or have an accident? We're responsible for you." His phrasing, "responsible for you," crystallized exactly what had been troubling me about our evolving dynamic. My children had shifted from being supportive of me to feeling responsible for me, a subtle but critical distinction that diminished my agency. "I am a competent adult making an informed decision," I replied, my teacher's voice emerging unconsciously. "While I appreciate your concern, I am responsible for myself. I've left contact information for the tour company and my complete itinerary with my neighbor Martha, who will check on the house regularly. Should any emergency arise, she knows how to reach me and all of you." "You told Martha about this trip before telling us." Michael's tone conveyed hurt and indignation. "Martha has been checking my mail and watering my plants during my absences for 15 years, I reminded him. "This is a practical arrangement, not an emotional ranking of relationships." The conversation continued in this vein for another 20 minutes, my children cycling through strategies ranging from emotional appeals to practical objections to subtle guilt tactics. I recognized the patterns from years of observing how they manage their own children's resistance, but found it unsettling to be on the receiving end of these parental manipulation techniques. Throughout, I maintained my position with calm clarity. The trip was happening, arrangements were finalized, and while I understood their concerns, my decision was made. Eventually, sensing the futility of their objections, they shifted to resignation and practical questions. "Will you at least text us when you arrive safely at each destination?" Rebecca asked. "Of course," I agreed readily. "And I'll send photos of the places your father always wanted to see. I think he would have liked that." This mention of James shifted the emotional tenor of the conversation. My children had adored their father, and invoking his memory reminded them of the deeper meaning behind my journey. "He would have loved knowing you were finally seeing Italy," Daniel acknowledged softly. "He talked about those art museums constantly when we were kids." As the call wound down, Michael made one final attempt. When you get back, we should really discuss your future living arrangements, Mom. This house is too big for one person, and the maintenance will become increasingly challenging. We can discuss many things when I return, I replied neutrally, unwilling to engage with this topic after the revelation at the bank. For now, I need to focus on preparations for my departure. After ending the call, I sat quietly in James's study, processing the interaction. While the conversation had been difficult, it was also necessary. The first step in establishing a new framework for our relationship, one based on mutual respect rather than assumed authority. My phone buzzed repeatedly throughout the afternoon, as my children apparently discussed the call amongst themselves and formed a new strategy. Text messages arrived from all three, each taking a slightly different approach, but conveying the same essential message. They had forgotten my milestone, birthday, and wanted to make amends before I left for Italy. Mom, we're planning a surprise birthday dinner this Saturday. Everyone will be there. Please keep the evening open. It's important to all of us to celebrate properly before your trip. Michael. Mom, I feel terrible about missing your 70th. The kids are devastated they didn't get to celebrate with Grandma. Please let us make it up to you this weekend. Rebecca. Mom, I've made reservations at Bellini's for Saturday at 6 p.m. Your favorite restaurant deserves to host your milestone celebration. The whole family wants to be there. Daniel, their coordinated effort might have touched me deeply a week earlier. Now it felt like a belated attempt to re-establish the status quo, to demonstrate their attentiveness and care after the fact, perhaps hoping to make me reconsider my independent actions. The timing was particularly telling, coming only after I had made a decision that didn't align with their expectations. After careful consideration, I texted a group response. Thank you for the thought. I'm quite busy with travel preparations but can manage a brief early dinner on Saturday. Please adjust the reservation to 5 p.m. so I can be home by 7:30 to continue packing. This response, accepting their gesture while maintaining boundaries, felt like an appropriate balance between acknowledging their effort and preserving my new resolve. The dinner would provide an opportunity to see my grandchildren before departing while establishing that my travel preparations took priority over extended social engagements, even with family. The next morning, I visited my primary care physician for a final pre-travel checkup and necessary vaccinations. Dr. Patel had been my doctor for over 20 years and knew my medical history thoroughly. Italy is an excellent choice, Eleanor, she commented while updating my records. The Mediterranean diet will be good for your heart, and the walking will benefit your bone density. Just remember to pace yourself and stay hydrated. As she completed her examination, she hesitated before asking, Have you discussed this trip with your children? Sometimes family members have concerns about international travel for... She paused, choosing her words carefully. For patients, in your demographic. My children have expressed their concerns quite thoroughly, I acknowledged with a wry smile. I suspect one of them may have called you? Dr. Patel's professional demeanor cracked slightly. I can't discuss specific communications, but I can say your medical information remains strictly confidential unless you authorize otherwise. I appreciate that, Doctor. To be clear, I do not authorize sharing my medical information with my children at this time. I am mentally and physically capable of making my own healthcare decisions. She nodded approvingly. You're in excellent health for any age, Eleanor, and particularly impressive for 70. Your cognitive function is sharp, your physical condition is better than most patients 15 years younger, and your preventative care has been exemplary. I have absolutely no medical concerns about your travel plans. Her professional assessment reinforced what I already knew, but provided additional confidence in the face of my children's objections. As I prepared to leave, she handed me a small travel medical kit, along with printed documentation of my vaccinations and prescriptions. One more thing, she added. Consider this trip preventative health care. Social engagement, intellectual stimulation, Physical activity and meaningful experiences are powerful contributors to longevity and quality of life. Your travel plans may be the best health intervention you could choose at this stage. Her words stayed with me as I continued my preparations throughout the week. Each task completed, from purchasing appropriate walking shoes to arranging for mail holding, felt like an affirmation of my capability and independence. The woman who had taught generations of students to think for themselves was finally applying that lesson to her own life. By Friday afternoon, my suitcase was mostly packed, my travel documents organized, and my home prepared for a 3-week absence. The only significant task remaining was finalizing the contents of the envelope I would leave on my kitchen table for my children to find after my departure. The envelope that would either begin healing our family dynamics or permanently alter them. As I sat at my desk composing this crucial document, I realized that the confrontation with my children had already shifted something fundamental in our relationship. Whether they recognized it yet or not, the maternal authority they had taken for granted was being reclaimed and redirected, not against them, but toward a more authentic expression of who I was beyond my role as their mother. The belated birthday. Dinner scheduled for tomorrow evening would be the true test of this evolving dynamic, our first in-person interaction since I had established these new boundaries. Their response would reveal much about the path forward for our family relationships, information I would carefully consider while finally experiencing the Italian journey James and I had planned for so many years. Bellini's had been James's and my special occasion restaurant throughout our marriage, the place where we celebrated anniversaries, job promotions, and children's graduations. The owner, Giuseppe, was the son of Italian immigrants who had opened the restaurant in the 1950s, and he maintained both his father's original recipes and the warm, familial atmosphere that made the establishment a local institution. I arrived, precisely at 5 p.m. on Saturday, intentionally neither early nor late. Giuseppe greeted me personally at the door, clasping my hands in his as he had done for decades. "Eleanor, when Daniel called for this reservation, I was so happy to hear it was for your birthday celebration. 70 years. A beautiful milestone." He lowered his voice conspiratorially. "I have prepared something special for dessert, just as James always arranged for your anniversaries." His words confirmed what I had suspected. Giuseppe knew about my birthday before my own children had remembered it. James had always enlisted Giuseppe's help for surprise celebrations, a tradition that had apparently been forgotten along with the date itself. "Thank you, Giuseppe. Your thoughtfulness means a great deal to me." He escorted me to the restaurant's best table in the back corner, a semicircular booth with a perfect view of both the fireplace and the piano where local musicians played on weekend evenings. The table was already set with the restaurant's finest linens and china, a small vase of freesias, my favorite flowers, positioned at its center. "James always requested this table," Giuseppe said softly. "He said the rounded booth let him sit close enough to hold your hand beneath the table during dinner, a small privacy amid the celebration." This detail, one I had never known during all our years of dining here, brought unexpected tears to my eyes. James had cultivated these small romantic gestures throughout our marriage, many of which I was still discovering years after his death. "He was a good man who adored you," Giuseppe added, patting my hand. "Now, your family should arrive any moment. The first glass of Prosecco is already waiting for you." As Giuseppe retreated, I composed myself and took a small sip of the sparkling wine, appreciating the quiet moment before my family arrived. The restaurant was beginning to fill with early dinner patrons, but the ambient noise remained pleasant, muted conversations and occasional laughter creating a comfortable backdrop. From my vantage point, I could see the restaurant entrance, and I watched as my family arrived en masse 7 minutes later. Michael entered first, checking his watch with a slight frown, ever the punctual executive. Rebecca followed with her 3 children, attempting to herd them toward the back while simultaneously texting on her phone. Daniel and his wife Jennifer came last, each holding the hand of one of their twins, who were dressed in matching outfits as they had been since infancy. The grandchildren spotted me first, breaking away from their parents to rush toward my table, with genuine excitement. "Grandma!" Emma, Rebecca's 12-year-old, reached me first. "Happy birthday. Mom said we forgot it last week and you were sad." Her innocent framing of the situation, that I was simply sad rather than fundamentally reconsidering our family dynamic, reflected how her mother had likely explained the situation. Before I could respond, the other grandchildren surrounded me with hugs and overlapping birthday wishes, their affection untainted by the complications of adult relationships. My children approached more hesitantly, their expressions a mixture of contrition and assessment, gauging my mood and receptiveness to their belated celebration. Each offered careful hugs and birthday wishes as they arranged themselves around the large booth, positioning their children strategically between us as unwitting buffers. "You look lovely, Mom," Rebecca offered, eyeing my outfit, a new silk blouse in deep teal that I had purchased specifically for my trip, rather than wearing one of my familiar practical sweaters. "That color is beautiful on you." "Thank you," I replied simply. "I'm trying some new styles for my travels." "About that," Michael began, but Daniel cut him off with a warning glance. "Let's focus on celebrating Mom's birthday first," Daniel suggested, diplomatically. "We have a lot to make up for." Giuseppe returned with children's menus for the younger grandchildren and a second round of Prosecco for the adults, seamlessly directing the conversation toward food rather than potentially contentious topics. As appetizers were ordered and bread baskets distributed, the initial tension gradually eased into the familiar rhythm of family dinner conversation. School updates, work anecdotes, and neighborhood news. Throughout the meal, I observed my family, with new awareness, noticing patterns I had previously overlooked or dismissed. Michael checked his phone between every course, his attention constantly divided. Rebecca directed most of her conversation toward her sister-in-law Jennifer rather than engaging directly with me. Daniel, always the family peacemaker, worked overtime to maintain positive energy, filling silences with questions about my teaching days and prompting the grandchildren to share recent achievements. Most revealing was how my children spoke about me rather than to me when discussing certain topics, referring to Mom's house or Mom's health in the third person, as if I weren't present to speak for myself. This subtle linguistic distancing reinforced my sense that they had begun to see me as a subject to be managed rather than an equal participant in family decisions. When our entrees arrived, Michael finally addressed the elephant in the room. "Mom, we want to apologize collectively for missing your birthday. It's inexcusable, especially for such an important milestone. We've been so caught up in our own lives that we failed to properly honor you, and we're deeply sorry." His apology sounded sincere if somewhat formal, like a prepared statement. Rebecca and Daniel nodded in agreement, their expressions appropriately contrite. "I appreciate the acknowledgement," I replied carefully. "Birthdays themselves aren't ultimately what matters. It's the ongoing relationship and respect they represent." "Exactly." Rebecca seized on this opening. "And that's partly why we're concerned about this sudden trip. It feels like you're making a major decision without involving us, which isn't how our family typically operates." I took a measured sip of water before responding. "I've made many decisions independently throughout my life, Rebecca. The difference now is that this particular decision doesn't align with your expectations of how I should behave at this stage of life." My direct assessment created a momentary silence, broken by 10-year-old Liam asking innocently, "Why can't Grandma go to Italy if she wants to? My friend Jake's grandma goes on cruises all the time by herself." Out of the mouths of babes, as the saying goes, my grandson had cut through the pretense to the heart of the matter. "Of course Grandma can travel," Michael assured his nephew hastily. We just want to make sure everything is properly arranged for her safety and comfort. I'm not actually fragile, despite what your tone suggests, I noted mildly. And all arrangements have been thoroughly considered, as I explained during our call. Daniel, ever the mediator, redirected the conversation. What parts of Italy are you most excited to see, Mom? Dad always talked about Florence and the art museums there. His genuine interest in my plans rather than opposition to them felt refreshing. For the next several minutes, I described the itinerary: the small hill towns of Umbria, the Renaissance art collections in Florence, the cooking classes in Bologna. As I spoke, I found myself growing increasingly animated, my genuine enthusiasm breaking through the careful composure I had maintained. It sounds wonderful, Jennifer commented sincerely. Daniel's father would have loved every minute of it. Yes, he would have, I agreed, grateful for her understanding. That's partly why this journey feels so important now. I'm not just traveling for myself, but also carrying James's dreams along with me. This framing, the trip as a tribute to their father rather than a rejection of them, visibly softened my children's resistance. They had adored James and respected his unfulfilled wishes. By connecting my travel plans to him, I had inadvertently found a more acceptable narrative for my independent action. As our main courses were cleared and Giuseppe approached with a surprising birthday cake ablaze with candles, I noticed my children exchanging glances, the silent communication of a unified front, preparing to present something. Before dessert, Michael announced after the birthday song concluded, we have something special to propose. Rebecca reached into her purse and withdrew an envelope, sliding it across the table toward me. We know we can't make up for forgetting your actual birthday, but we hope this might show how much we value you. Inside the envelope, I found a printed itinerary for a luxury Mediterranean cruise departing 3 months in the future, with accommodations for 4 staterooms, one for me and one for each of my children's families. We thought a family vacation would be the perfect gift, Daniel explained enthusiastically. The cruise visits several Italian ports, so you'll still see Italy, but we'll all be together to enjoy it. Much better than traveling alone, right? The gesture was both generous and telling. They had created an alternative that would fulfill my desire to see Italy, but on their terms, a family-centered experience where I would remain in my familiar role as mother and grandmother, rather than an independent traveler with agency outside. Family structures. This is very thoughtful, I acknowledged, carefully choosing my words. A cruise together would certainly be a different experience from the cultural immersion tour I've planned. But better, Rebecca insisted. You wouldn't have to worry about navigating unfamiliar places alone or dealing with language barriers. Plus, the grandchildren would have that special time with you. What remained unspoken was the clear expectation that I would cancel my imminent trip in favor of their alternative plan. The substantial cost of the cruise and their unified presentation suggested complete confidence that I would agree to their solution. I appreciate the thought behind this gift, I said finally, closing the envelope and placing it beside my plate. A family cruise might indeed be lovely in the future. However, it doesn't replace the journey I've already arranged, which begins next week. Their unified disappointment was palpable, an almost physical deflation around the table as they realized their strategy had failed. Michael recovered first, his business negotiation skills engaging automatically. The cruise is fully refundable, Mom. We can always rebook for another time if you're determined to take this tour, but perhaps you could consider postponing your trip until after we've had more time to discuss everything. There's no rush, after all. But there was a rush, an urgency I felt deeply at 70 years old that my 50-year-old son couldn't yet comprehend. Each day now carried a precious quality it hadn't possessed in my youth, each opportunity feeling less guaranteed. James's sudden death had taught me how quickly everything could change, how assumptions about plenty of time could be devastatingly wrong. The tour begins next Friday, I stated simply. I'll be on it. Giuseppe's arrival with coffee service created a timely interruption to the tension. As he distributed espressos and cappuccinos with his usual flair, I used the moment to steer the conversation toward the grandchildren's summer plans, safer territory that allowed everyone to regain composure after my gentle but firm rejection of their alternative. Throughout dessert, I observed my children's reactions more carefully. Behind their ongoing conversation, I could see them processing my continued resistance, reconciling themselves to this unexpected version of their mother, who prioritized her own plans over their collective arrangement. The realization that they could neither change my mind nor control my decisions was slowly taking root, creating varying responses. Michael's expression betrayed frustration and confusion. The executive accustomed to directing outcomes finding himself unexpectedly powerless. Rebecca alternated between attempts at emotional connection and barely concealed irritation. Daniel, most adaptable of the three, seemed to be genuinely considering my perspective, his questions about my itinerary becoming more specific and supportive as the evening progressed. As the dinner concluded, and the bill was discreetly managed by Michael, who waved away my offer to contribute, our family gathering reached a gentle impasse, my children recognizing that their collective strategies had failed to alter my plans, and me understanding more clearly the depth of adjustment required for our relationship to evolve. Outside the restaurant, as goodbyes were exchanged in the cool evening air, my youngest granddaughter Sophia tugged at my hand. At 7 years old, she had been largely quiet during dinner, observing the adult interactions with solemn attention. "Grandma," she whispered as I bent to hug her, "will you send me postcards from Italy? Real ones that come in the mail, not just pictures on Mom's phone?" "I will send you a postcard from every city I visit," I promised, touched by her request for this tangible connection. "And when I return, we'll put them all together in a special album so you can see my whole journey." Her face brightened. "And you'll tell me all about it? Everything you saw and did?" "Every single detail," I assured her. Some adventures are better when they're shared afterward. As my family departed in their separate vehicles, I lingered a moment in the restaurant parking lot, watching their taillights disappear into the evening traffic. The dinner had revealed something I hadn't fully appreciated before. While my children's attitude toward me had shifted over time, my grandchildren's perception remained uncomplicated by adult concerns about control and independence. They simply loved their grandmother and accepted my choices without the overlay of anxiety about what those choices might represent. Driving home alone, I considered how to incorporate this insight into my plans. The envelope I would leave behind needed to speak not just to my children's concerns, but also to my grandchildren's simpler understanding of family love and connection. They deserved reassurance that my journey represented expansion rather than abandonment, adventure rather than rejection. When I arrived home, I went directly to my desk and removed the draft letter I had been working on. Reading it with fresh eyes after the evening's interactions, I realized it contained too much explanation and justification, an implicit acknowledgement that my choices required defense. Starting with a clean sheet of paper, I began again, writing with the clarity and confidence that had defined my best teaching years. This revised message would form the core of what I would leave behind, not an apology or elaborately justified explanation, but a clear statement of intention and love that respected both myself and my family. As midnight approached, I completed the final version, knowing it represented exactly what I needed to communicate before embarking on this new chapter of my life. The single envelope I would leave on my kitchen table wouldn't contain recriminations about forgotten birthdays or neglected relationships. Instead, it would offer a gentle but profound invitation to evolve together into a new family dynamic, one where love remained constant, but roles and expectations could change with life's seasons. Whether my children would be ready to accept this invitation remained to be seen, but the choice to offer it was entirely mine, and for the first time in many years, I felt completely certain of both my decision and my right to make it. The Sunday before my departure dawned with unexpected sunshine breaking through what had been a week of spring showers. I took it as a promising sign for both my journey and the decisions I had finalized overnight. After my morning coffee, I called Martha from next door to confirm our arrangements for house checking and plant care during my absence. "Everything's set, Eleanor," she assured me. "I've got your spare key, the security code, and all the instructions for your African violets. Don't worry about a thing here. Just enjoy every moment of Italy." Martha, a retired librarian 10 years my junior, had been my neighbor and friend since James and I moved into the neighborhood. Unlike many friendships that fade with time, ours had deepened after James's death, sustained by shared interests in gardening, literature, and our volunteer work at the Community Literacy Center. "Thank you, Martha. There's one more thing I'd like to ask, if you don't mind." I hesitated briefly before continuing. "My children are concerned about my traveling alone. I suspect they might check on the house more frequently than necessary while I'm gone." Martha chuckled knowingly. "Let me guess. They think you've lost your mind taking off for Italy at our advanced age?" "Something like that," I admitted. "If they come by asking questions or expressing concerns, would you mind being deliberately vague about my specific plans? I've left them detailed information, but I'd prefer they rely on direct communication with me rather than investigating through others." "Say no more," Martha replied, her librarian's discretion evident in her tone. "I'll simply tell them you're having a wonderful time and any questions should be directed to you personally. I'm quite practiced at providing non-answers that sound helpful. It was an essential skill at the reference desk." After ending the call, I dressed in comfortable clothes and drove to the cemetery where James was buried. In our 42 years of marriage, we had established few formal rituals, but visiting his grave before significant life events had become my private custom since his death. Though I didn't believe he was literally present there, the peaceful setting provided space for the internal conversations I still carried on with him. The cemetery was quiet that morning, with only a groundskeeper visible in the distance. I made my way along the familiar path to James's headstone, a simple granite marker inscribed with his name, dates, and the quote from Shakespeare he had selected years before his death. "Love is not love which alters when it alteration finds." I placed the small bouquet of daffodils I had brought from our garden beside the stone and sat on the bench we had donated in his memory. "I'm going to Italy next week," I said aloud, feeling none of the self-consciousness that had accompanied these one-sided conversations in the early years after his death. "Finally seeing all those Renaissance masterpieces you lectured about for decades. I think you'd approve, though probably not of my going alone." The gentle breeze rustled the nearby willow tree, its sound providing a peaceful backdrop to my monologue. "The children are upset, of course. They've forgotten how capable I am, or perhaps they never fully knew. It's partly my fault. After you died, I leaned so heavily into being their mother and the grandchildren's grandmother that I let other aspects of myself fade into the background. I described the forgotten birthday, the subsequent revelations about my financial situation, and my decision to revise my estate plans, speaking as freely as I would have if James were sitting beside me on the bench. "I'm leaving them an envelope before I go," I continued, "not to hurt them or create drama, but to clarify some truths that need addressing. I've avoided difficult conversations for too long, wanting to preserve harmony at any cost. But that approach hasn't served any of us well, has it?" A family arrived at a nearby grave, parents with young children placing flowers and small toys at what appeared to be a grandparent's resting place. Their presence reminded me of bringing our own children here years ago, teaching them that remembrance was an act of love, not merely obligation. As the family departed, I returned to my contemplation. The envelope contains 3 things: practical information they'll need during my absence, financial documentation they should have, and a letter explaining my perspective on our changing relationship. I've tried to write with honesty but also compassion, James. I think you would approve of the balance. I sat in silence for several minutes, gathering my thoughts for what felt like the most important part of this conversation. What I haven't fully acknowledged until now is how angry I've been, not just about the forgotten birthday, but about the gradual erosion of respect in our relationship. They've begun treating me as a responsibility rather than a person with my own agency and desires. You never did that, not once in all our years together. Even when we disagreed, you saw me as your equal partner, never someone to be managed or directed. Tears formed unexpectedly as I confronted this painful truth. I miss that most, I think, being truly seen by someone who loved me completely. The children love me, I know that, but they don't see me as you did. A cardinal landed on a nearby headstone, its brilliant red plumage vivid against the gray granite. James had always pointed out cardinals on our walks, claiming they brought messages from loved ones who had passed. I smiled at the memory, allowing myself to briefly imagine this visitor as his acknowledgement of my words. I won't be leaving the envelope out of anger, I continued after the bird departed. That was my first impulse, I admit, but I've moved beyond that now. This is about honesty and necessary change, about creating healthier patterns before it's too late. I want a relationship with our children where I'm respected as a complete person, not just accommodated in my role as their mother. The morning. Sun had risen higher during my monologue, warming the bench and illuminating the daffodils beside James's headstone. I touched the warm granite briefly before standing. I'll bring back stories and photographs to share with you next time, I promised. All those places you taught generations of students about, I'll finally see them for both of us. As I walked back to my car, I felt lighter somehow, unburdened by the uncertainty that had troubled me since making my decision. The conversation, one-sided as it was, had clarified my purpose. This journey wasn't an act of rebellion or petty revenge for a forgotten birthday. It was a necessary reclamation of self after years of allowing my identity to be subsumed by family roles and obligations. Back home, I spent the remainder of the morning finalizing the contents of the envelope I would leave behind. The practical information came first: a printed itinerary with hotel contacts, tour company emergency numbers, and the international cellular service I had arranged. Next came copies of my updated legal documents, powers of attorney for healthcare and finances, along with a summary of changes to my estate planning, though not the full details, which would be appropriately shared by Stanley at a later date. The letter itself required the most careful attention. After multiple drafts, I had distilled my message to 3 essential pages that I hoped would be received in the spirit intended, as an invitation to evolve our relationship rather than an indictment of past failures. My dear children, by the time you read this, I will be on my way to Italy, a journey your father and I planned for decades but never had the chance to take together. At 70 years old, I've realized that someday never arrives unless we deliberately create it. I understand my decision to travel independently has caused concern. Your worry comes from love, and I appreciate that. However, it has revealed a fundamental misalignment in how we view my life at this stage. A misalignment I feel compelled to address before it further affects our relationship. The truth is, simple but significant, I am still very much a whole person with dreams, capabilities, and agency beyond my roles as your mother and your children's grandmother. These roles are precious to me, but they are not the entirety of who I am. Somewhere in recent years, this fundamental truth seems to have been forgotten by all of us. My 70th birthday passing without acknowledgement was not insignificant. Not because I needed celebration or gifts, but because it revealed how peripheral I have become in your busy lives. This realization was painful, but ultimately clarifying. It showed me that I have allowed myself to be defined increasingly by my utility to all of you, rather than being valued for my complete self. This is not about blame. We have all contributed to this dynamic. Me, perhaps most of all, by prioritizing harmony and availability over honest communication. The patterns we've established have become comfortable but not necessarily healthy. I take responsibility for my part in creating them, and now for changing them. The financial documents included here require explanation. As you'll see, my resources are considerably more substantial than you might have assumed. Your father and I lived modestly by choice, not necessity, believing that character is built through effort rather than abundance. The loans I provided each of you over the years, documented in the attached statements, were given freely, from love. However, the fact that these significant sums were accepted and then apparently forgotten reflects the unintentional imbalance that has developed in our relationship. I have recently revised my estate planning to better reflect my values and intentions. The details will be properly shared at the appropriate time, but I want you to know that these changes were made thoughtfully, not reactively. They represent my genuine wishes for how my lifetime of work and careful stewardship should ultimately benefit future generations. My journey to Italy is not an impulsive reaction to feeling forgotten on my birthday. Rather, that overlooked milestone provided necessary clarity about changes I've been considering for some time. This trip represents my choice to honor the dreams your father and I shared while embracing this new chapter of my life with intention and joy. I will stay in regular contact throughout my travels, sending updates and photographs. I look forward to sharing the experience with all of you when I return. In the meantime, I ask that you respect my independence as I have always respected yours, with trust in my judgment and confidence in my capabilities. This letter is written with deep love for each of you. My hope is that it opens a path to a refreshed relationship, one where I am present as your mother and your children's grandmother, but also recognized as Eleanor Jenkins, a complete woman with her own purpose and path. All my love. Mom. After printing the final version, I read it once more, satisfied that it conveyed exactly what needed to be said, direct but not unkind, honest about hurt feelings without weaponizing them, clear about expectations moving forward without issuing ultimatums. I placed the letter and accompanying documents in a large manila envelope, writing Michael, Rebecca, and Daniel on the front in my distinctive teacher's handwriting. The envelope itself I set aside rather than leaving it out immediately. It would be placed on the kitchen table just before my departure for the airport, minimizing the possibility of premature discovery and intervention. The remainder of Sunday passed in peaceful preparation, checking weather forecasts for each destination, downloading Italian language applications to my tablet, and selecting a few small gifts I had purchased for the grandchildren to be mailed from various points along my journey. These tangible connections would maintain our bond while I was physically absent, especially for the younger ones who measured time differently than adults. That evening, I received texts from all 3 children, each checking in with transparent casualness that barely disguised their continued concern about my travel plans. Just confirming you're all set for Friday's departure? Let me know if you need a ride to the airport. Michael, the kids are hoping to see you before you leave. Any chance you're free Tuesday afternoon? Rebecca, dropped some travel essentials on your porch. Nothing major, just some things that might be useful. Call if you need help packing. Daniel I responded to each with brief appreciation, but made no commitments that would disrupt my carefully planned final days at home. Their increased attention since learning of my travel plans was noteworthy. The forgotten birthday had suddenly catalyzed an abundance of concern and availability that had been markedly absent before. This observation wasn't bitter, but instructive. It revealed how crisis or perceived crisis mobilized their attention in ways that ordinary relationship maintenance did not. When they believed I was acting within expected parameters, I became essentially invisible, a stable background element in their busy lives rather than a dynamic presence requiring genuine engagement. As I prepared for bed that night, I found myself anticipating Friday's departure with growing excitement rather than anxiety. The passport on my nightstand represented not just documentation for international travel, but a tangible symbol of new possibilities, proof that at 70, life could still contain adventure, discovery, and meaningful change. The turning point had arrived, not just in my travel plans, but in my fundamental approach to family relationships. The journey to Italy would certainly bring new experiences and perspectives, but the most significant transformation had already begun: the internal shift from accommodation to authenticity, from availability to agency. The envelope I would leave behind contained more than information and explanation. It held an invitation to a new chapter in our family story, one where love remained the constant foundation, but roles and expectations could evolve with dignity and mutual respect. Whether my children would accept this invitation remained uncertain, but extending it was entirely within my power. That night, I slept more peacefully than I had in months, unburdened by the weight of unmet expectations and unacknowledged hurt. Whatever came next, whether understanding or resistance from my children, I had reclaimed the most essential element of my personhood: the authority to determine my own path forward, guided by my own values and priorities rather than others' expectations. The woman who would board a plane to Rome on Friday would carry not just carefully packed luggage, but also a renewed sense of self, one that honored both the mother and grandmother I had been for decades, and the independent, adventurous soul I had always been beneath those cherished roles. My flight to Rome departed at 11:30 a.m. on Friday, which meant I needed to be at the airport by 8:30. I had arranged for a car service rather than accepting Michael's offer of a ride, not out of spite, but to maintain the independence that had become increasingly important to me. I woke before dawn that final morning, my body humming with anticipation. After showering and dressing in the comfortable travel outfit I had selected, linen pants, a light cashmere sweater, and supportive walking shoes, I moved through my morning routine with deliberate attention, savoring the familiar rituals that would soon be exchanged for new experiences. The house was uncommonly quiet, as if holding its breath alongside me. I made one final tour of each room, checking windows and appliances, adjusting thermostats, and saying a silent goodbye to the space that had housed so many memories. In James's study, I paused longest, resting my hand on his leather chair and promising to return with stories he would have loved to hear. At 7:15, I placed the envelope on the kitchen table, positioning it prominently where it couldn't be missed when my children inevitably came checking on the house. Beside it, I left my house key and security code information for Martha, though she already had her own copy. The car service arrived precisely at 7:30, a silver sedan with a courteous driver who handled my luggage efficiently while I locked the front door. As we pulled away from the curb, I resisted the urge to look back, focusing instead on the journey ahead rather than what I was temporarily leaving behind. The drive to the airport passed quickly, with little traffic on the Friday. Morning roads. At the international terminal, the driver helped with my luggage and wished me buon viaggio with a warm smile. The Italian phrase, one of many I had been practicing, felt like a welcoming embrace from the adventure that awaited. Check-in, and security proceeded smoothly, leaving me with nearly 2 hours before boarding. I found a quiet cafe in the terminal and ordered breakfast, savoring the novelty of dining alone without feeling either rushed or observed. My phone remained silent. No messages yet from my children, who likely assumed I was still at home preparing for a later departure. As I sipped my coffee, I observed other travelers in the terminal. Business people hurrying between connections, families wrangling excited children, couples leaning into each other while waiting at gates. Among them were several solo travelers approximately my age, moving with the confident ease of experienced voyagers. I felt an immediate kinship with these strangers, wondering about their stories and destinations. At 10:45, as boarding for my flight began, I finally texted my children a simple message. Boarding my flight to Rome now. Will message when I arrive. Love you all. Their responses came almost immediately, suggesting they had been monitoring their phones for communication from me. Safe travels, Mom. Call as soon as you land, regardless of time difference. Michael, sending love and safe journey wishes. The kids made cards for you that we'll save for your return. Rebecca, travel safely. Left something for you at the front desk of your first hotel. Love you. Daniel, each message carried its own emotional tenor. Michael's practical and slightly commanding. Rebecca's warm but focused on the grandchildren. Daniel's thoughtful and supportive. They reflected their personalities perfectly, these adult children I had raised and loved through all life seasons. As I boarded the plane and settled into my seat by the window, I felt none of the anxiety or doubt my children had projected onto my journey. Instead, a profound sense of rightness accompanied each step, from stowing my carry-on in the overhead compartment to buckling my seatbelt and accepting a pre-takeoff beverage from the flight attendant. When the massive jet engines roared to, life in the plane began its taxi toward the runway. I closed my eyes briefly, offering a silent acknowledgement to James. We're finally going to Italy, my love. I'll see everything for both of us. The 12-hour flight passed more comfortably than I had anticipated. I alternated between reading my Italian guidebook, watching a documentary about Renaissance art, and conversing with my seatmate, a retired professor of classical literature making his annual pilgrimage to study ancient manuscripts in Rome. His enthusiasm for sharing knowledge reminded me powerfully of James, making the long journey feel almost like a reunion rather than a solo adventure. When we landed at Leonardo da Vinci International Airport the following morning, Rome greeted us with brilliant sunshine and the promising warmth of early spring. As passengers around me immediately reached for their phones to announce their arrival, I deliberately kept mine tucked away, wanting to absorb the moment fully before reconnecting with the world I had temporarily left behind. The customs process moved efficiently, and soon I was emerging into the arrival hall with my luggage, searching for the driver my tour company had arranged. A distinguished man in his 60s held a sign with my name, introducing himself as Carlo, who would transport me to the hotel where I would meet my tour group the following day. Benvenuta in Italia, Signora Jenkins. He greeted me with a warm smile. È la sua prima visita a Roma? Sì, è la mia prima visita, I responded with careful pronunciation. Ma ho studiato l'Italia per molti anni. His eyebrows rose appreciatively at my attempt at Italian. Your accent is quite good for a first-time visitor, he commented, switching to lightly accented English. Most Americans don't bother learning even basic phrases before arriving. My husband taught Renaissance history for 40 years, I explained, as he guided me toward the parking area. Italian culture and language were part of our daily lives, though neither of us had the opportunity to visit until now. And your husband, he is joining you later? Carlo asked conversationally. He passed away 12 years ago, I replied, finding that the words carried less sharp pain than they once had. This journey is partly in his honor, seeing the art and architecture he loved teaching about for so many years. Carlo nodded with understanding that seemed genuinely empathetic rather than merely polite. Then you bring him with you in your heart. Many find that Italy helps them feel closer to those they have lost. Something in the timelessness of these ancient places reminds us that love continues beyond physical presence. His unexpected eloquence touched me deeply, setting the tone for what would unfold as a transformative experience. During the 40-minute drive from the airport to my hotel near the historic center, Carlo provided commentary on the passing landmarks and offered suggestions for my free day before the tour officially began. At the hotel, a beautifully restored 17th-century palazzo, I was welcomed with unexpected warmth by the front desk manager. Signora Jenkins, we have been expecting you. Your room is ready despite the early hour. She smiled conspiratorially and added, and we have a package waiting for you. delivered yesterday with specific instructions that it be given immediately, upon your arrival. The package was a small, carefully wrapped box with Daniel's distinctive handwriting on the attached card. Inside, I found an elegant leather-bound journal with marbled paper edges and an antique silver pen that I recognized. Immediately, it had been James's favorite, a graduation gift from his own father that he had used throughout his teaching career. The accompanying note brought tears to my eyes. Mom, Dad always said he would record his impressions of Italy in a special journal when you finally took that. Dream trip together. I found this in his desk after he died but never knew quite what to do with it. Now it seems obvious. It was waiting for this journey. The pen is his as well, as you'll recognize. I had it restored and filled with ink, ready to capture your experiences in a way that would have made him proud. Travel safely, observe deeply, and write it all down for both of you. With love and newfound respect. Daniel. Of my 3 children, Daniel had always been the most intuitively connected to both his father and me, the one most likely to understand unspoken feelings and respond to emotional nuances. His gift acknowledged both my journey and its deeper meaning in a way that moved me profoundly. After settling into my room and refreshing myself from the long flight, I finally turned on my phone to find numerous messages from my children. Some expressing concern about my delayed communication, others sharing details about their discovery of the envelope I had left behind. Rather than responding to each message separately, I sent a group text with a photo of the Spanish Steps visible from my hotel room window. Arrived safely in Rome. The Eternal City is as beautiful as your father always described. I'm rested and looking forward to exploring tomorrow before my tour begins. Thank you for your messages and support. I'll call once I've adjusted to the time difference. Love to all. Then I silenced notifications, placed the phone on the nightstand, and opened Daniel's gift journal to its first blank page. With James's pen in hand, I began to write. Rome, Day 1. I've arrived in the city James described so vividly to generations of students. The journey that brought me here was much longer than the 12-hour flight. It began with a forgotten birthday that unexpectedly opened the door to reclaiming parts of myself I had set aside for decades. This journal will record not just the art and architecture we dreamed of seeing together, but also the interior journey of discovering who Eleanor Jenkins is beyond being mother, grandmother, and widow. These roles have shaped and blessed my life, but they aren't its entirety. Whatever awaits in the coming weeks, both here in Italy and upon my return home, begins with this first step into the unknown, this deliberate choice to prioritize long-deferred dreams and authentic self-expression. James would approve, I think. He always saw me more completely than anyone, recognizing capabilities and depths I sometimes forgot myself. This journey honors not just his memory, but also his unwavering belief in me as a whole person, complex and ever-evolving, despite life's changes and challenges. Over the next 3 weeks, that journal filled with observations, reflections, and discoveries as I immersed myself in the Italian experience. The small tour group, 11 travelers ranging in age from 65 to 82, quickly formed meaningful connections through shared meals, art appreciation, and the peculiar intimacy that develops among strangers temporarily sharing extraordinary experiences. I found myself more sociable than I had been in years, joining optional evening excursions, participating actively in discussions with local guides, and even accepting an invitation to dinner with Martin, a widowed literature professor from Vermont, whose gentle humor and intellectual curiosity reminded me of James without attempting to replace him. Each day brought new wonders, standing before Michelangelo's David in Florence, feeling its impossible perfection rendered in cold marble, participating in a pasta-making class in Bologna, laughing with newfound friends as we created imperfect but delicious tagliatelle, sitting in silent contemplation within a sunlit Umbrian cathedral older than my entire nation, feeling centuries of devotion embedded in its ancient stones. Throughout these experiences, I maintained contact with my family through carefully curated updates, sharing significant moments without allowing their responses, ranging from continued concern to gradual acceptance to influence my immersion in the journey. I sent individual postcards to each grandchild as promised, and occasionally called during appropriate hours to share brief conversations about my adventures. What I didn't immediately share was the subtle but profound transformation occurring within me, a restoration of confidence, curiosity, and joy that had gradually diminished in the years following James's death. With each day in Italy, I reclaimed pieces of myself that had been temporarily set aside while prioritizing others' needs and expectations. 2 weeks into the trip, I received an unexpected email from Stanley Hargrove. Eleanor, I hope this finds you enjoying the Italian adventure you so richly deserve. I'm writing to inform you that your children visited my office yesterday, requesting information about the changes to your estate planning mentioned in the documents you left for them. While maintaining appropriate confidentiality, I explained the general framework of your revised arrangements, the educational foundation, the conditional trusts for your grandchildren, and the provisions regarding outstanding loans. I also clarified your legal right to make these changes and the thoughtful consideration that informed them. Their reactions may interest you. Initially, there was considerable surprise and some defensiveness, particularly from Michael. However, as our conversation progressed, I observed a gradual shift toward reflection and even a degree of remorse. Rebecca specifically acknowledged that the family had taken your support for granted while failing to recognize your continuing growth as an individual. Daniel asked insightful questions about the educational foundation's structure, expressing genuine interest in its purpose rather than concern about reduced inheritance. They left with a visibly different perspective than they arrived with, less focused on financial implications and more attuned to the values you're expressing through these decisions. I believe your absence has created space for important realizations that might have been impossible during regular family interactions. There's no action required on your part. I simply thought you might appreciate this update as you continue your journey. Safe travels. Stanley. This information confirmed what I had hoped but couldn't predict, that the envelope's contents would prompt reflection rather than merely resistance. The physical distance between us seemed to be facilitating an emotional reassessment that close proximity might have prevented. As my journey neared its conclusion, I found myself contemplating return with neither dread nor anxiety, but rather with curiosity about how our family dynamic might evolve based on this shared experience of separation and reflection. The independent woman who had explored Italy for 3 weeks was not the same mother and grandmother who had departed 3 weeks earlier. And perhaps my children were not quite the same either. On my final evening in Rome, before departing for home the following day, I sat at a small cafe near the Pantheon, Daniel's journal open before me. The pages that had been blank upon arrival were now filled with observations, sketches, and reflections, a tangible record of both external explorations and internal discoveries. In the journal's final pages, I wrote a conclusion of sorts, though I recognized that the true resolution of this journey was still unfolding. Rome, final evening. Tomorrow I return home, carrying Italy within me just as I carried James throughout this journey. I am returning physically to the same house, the same family, the same community, but I am not the same woman who left 3 weeks ago. This journey began with a forgotten birthday that highlighted how invisible I had become, even to those who love me most. The hurt of that oversight opened a door I might otherwise have left closed, leading to this reclamation of self that has been unexpected in its completeness. I've learned that it's never too late to expand the definitions that have shaped a lifetime. At 70, I am still discovering facets of Eleanor Jenkins that surprise and delight me. Capabilities, preferences, and strengths that emerged when given space to express themselves. The single envelope I left behind contained necessary truths, offered not in anger but in love, an invitation to evolution rather than accusation. From what I understand, it has prompted valuable reflection in my children, creating possibility for more authentic connection moving forward. Whatever comes next in our family story, this chapter has been essential, not because of the forgotten birthday that catalyzed it, but because of the growth it eventually inspired in all of us. James would say that the measure of a life well lived is not the absence of difficulties, but how we transform them into opportunities for greater wisdom and deeper connection. By that standard, these past weeks have added immeasurably to the richness of my 70 years. The following day, as my plane lifted off from Italian soil and banked westward toward home, I felt none of the reluctance or sadness that often accompanies the end of transformative experiences. Instead, I carried a quiet confidence that the most important elements of my journey would continue long after returning to familiar surroundings. The passport in my carry-on bag, now stamped with evidence of adventures in Rome, Florence, Siena, Assisi, and countless small hill towns in between, represented more than just documentation of international travel. It had become a symbol of possibilities still awaiting discovery, proof that at 70 years old, life remained full of potential for surprise, growth, and joy. When we landed 12 hours later, I turned on my phone to find a simple text message from all three of my children. "Welcome home, Mom. We're all here at the airport when you're ready." No rush, no pressure, just love. As I emerged from customs into the arrival hall, I spotted them immediately. Michael, Rebecca, and Daniel standing together, respectfully distant rather than rushing forward to take my luggage or direct my movements. Their faces held something new, an awareness and uncertainty that suggested significant internal shifts during my absence. Rebecca stepped forward first, embracing me warmly but without the excessive concern that might have characterized our previous reunion. "Welcome home, Mom. You look wonderful. Italy clearly agreed with you." "It did," I confirmed, accepting Michael's more reserved hug and Daniel's gentle kiss on my cheek. "Thank you all for coming." "We received your envelope," Michael said directly, his typical approach to difficult conversations. "And we've had some important family discussions while you were away." "I'd love to hear about those," I replied sincerely. "But perhaps not immediately after a 12-hour flight?" Daniel smiled, the first genuine smile I'd seen from any of them. "Absolutely. No agenda today except getting you home safely. Everything else can wait until you're ready." This simple acknowledgement of my needs and preferences without assumption or direction signaled the beginning of the change I had hoped for, respect for my autonomy alongside continued family connection. As we walked toward the exit, Rebecca asked tentatively, "Would you be willing to share some of your experiences when you feel rested? The children have been following your journey on a map, placing the postcards you sent as they arrived. They're fascinated by everything you've seen and done." "I'd love that," I agreed, touched by this evidence that my grandchildren had remained connected to me despite the physical distance. "Perhaps Sunday dinner at my house this weekend? I could prepare an Italian meal inspired by my cooking class in Bologna." "We'll be there," Michael confirmed, then added with unusual self-awareness, "and we'll come as guests rather than managers this time." His words, acknowledging the dynamic that had developed without my explicitly naming it, suggested a depth of reflection I hadn't dared hope for. As we reached Michael's car in the parking structure, I realized with quiet satisfaction that the journey I had undertaken contained exactly the transformation I had needed most, not just for myself, but potentially for our entire family system. The single envelope I had left behind had indeed changed everything. Not through accusation or ultimatum, but through honest communication that created space for necessary growth. The passport, with its collection of international stamps, had documented not just a physical journey through Italy, but a more significant journey toward authentic selfhood at 70 years old. As we drove toward home through the familiar landscape, I felt profound gratitude for the forgotten birthday that had initially caused such pain. That oversight had ultimately created an opening for something precious, the opportunity to reclaim myself while simultaneously inviting my family into a more genuine, respectful relationship. The greatest gift of turning 70, I realized, wasn't the travel or experiences themselves, but the wisdom to recognize that it's never too late to redefine how we engage with those we love most, and the courage to initiate those changes even when the path forward seems uncertain. My journey had just begun.